My name is Kara. I'm 28 years old, and I never thought my life would fall apart on the front porch of a house in Dallas, Texas. The rain was coming down hard, and I was holding a half-zipped suitcase in one hand and my little boy's grocery bag of clothes in the other. My mother-in-law stood in the doorway with her hand on the frame like she owned the whole street. Her voice was steady, polished, and sharp when she told me I was nothing more than a temporary guest. Then she shut the door in my face. 12 hours earlier, I had watched her toast with a glass of champagne as a wire transfer landed in her account. The amount was so unreal, I thought I'd misheard the lawyer. Nearly $300 million, released from a family trust one didn't even know existed. In that moment, she became untouchable, or so she believed. The neighbors across the street peeked through their blinds as I stood outside, shivering. I wasn't just humiliated, I was erased. In her eyes, I was nothing, like the years of caring for her after her stroke had vanished into thin air. My son tugged at my coat and asked if Grandma was mad at us. I didn't know what to say, so I just hugged him tighter and carried him toward the only taxi I could afford that night. As we drove away, the mansion glowed brighter than ever, but my chest felt hollow. I thought about the sacrifices I had made, leaving Ohio, leaving my parents, putting my career on hold. None of that mattered to her. Wealth had made her ruthless, and I was the casualty. The driver asked me where to, and I told him, anywhere cheap. He dropped me at a roadside motel near Fort Worth, where the sign flickered and the air smelled like damp carpet. I laid my son on the bed and watched him drift into sleep. My phone buzzed with missed calls from friends back in Ohio, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. How could I explain that I had been discarded like trash by the very family I had sacrificed everything for? I turned on the motel television for background noise, and that's when I saw it, the breaking news ticker. Major fraud investigation tied to wealthy Fort Worth widow. Assets frozen. The name on the screen made me sit up straight. It was hers. That night, as the rain drummed harder against the window, I realized my story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The motel room was small, barely enough space for two people, but in that silence I heard everything. The hum of the broken air conditioner, the soft snore of my son, the buzzing neon light outside the window. I sat on the edge of the bed with a towel over my shoulders, still damp from the storm. My suitcase lay open on the floor, a sad mix of clothes, toothpaste, and papers I had stuffed in without thinking. I couldn't stop replaying the scene at the house. Her face calm, almost smug, as she called me a temporary guest. She had waited until the money cleared to show me the door. She wanted power, and I was in her way. The memory burned inside me like fire. But then came the news broadcast. Fraud. Federal agents. Assets frozen. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart racing. It didn't make sense. How could someone who just received $300 million be in trouble already? I thought back to the papers I'd copied weeks earlier. Medical directives. Signatures that didn't match. Dates that made no sense. At the time, I didn't know why she had altered them, but I knew they weren't right. I had tucked the copies into a folder and forgotten about them. Until now. I reached into my suitcase and pulled the folder out. The edges were bent, but the contents were clear. Every page told a story she thought no one would see. A story that could ruin her. My hands trembled as I spread them on the bed. For the first time since the door slammed in my face, I felt a spark of control. As dawn crept closer, I knew she would realize I had what she needed. And when she did, the balance of power would shift. I wasn't always this woman sitting in a motel with secrets in her suitcase. Years ago, I was just a girl from Ohio who fell in love with a man who promised me stability. His name was Daniel, and when he said he had to move to Texas for work, I followed without hesitation. At first, Dallas felt like a new start. Bigger homes, warmer weather, endless opportunities. But what looked like opportunity quickly became isolation. Daniel worked long hours, traveling from Houston to Austin, chasing promotions I rarely understood. I stayed behind with his mother, Margaret, who had suffered a mild stroke the year before. I cooked, cleaned, and made sure she took her medicine. Margaret never thanked me. She had a way of making me feel small, like I didn't belong. At family gatherings, she'd correct how I set the table or whisper to neighbors that I wasn't from here. I tried to ignore it. I told myself if I was patient, things would get better. But one night, as I sorted through her paperwork to help her pay bills, I noticed something strange. A medical form signed with a shaky hand that didn't look like her late husband's. The date was off too. My stomach sank. I tucked it back quickly, but a seed of suspicion grew inside me. That was the first time I realized her polished exterior hid something darker. Life in that house became a routine of service. Every morning, I made oatmeal the way she liked it, thin, with a drizzle of honey. I set her pills in a plastic organizer. I cleaned her kitchen until the tiles shined. But no matter what I did, she found fault. Too much salt. Not folded right. Why don't you work like other women? Sometimes Daniel would walk in during her lectures. Instead of defending me, he'd side with her. She means well, he'd say, brushing past me to kiss his mother on the cheek. I felt invisible, like a shadow in my own marriage. The walls of that mansion were heavy with her judgment. Even the neighbors sensed it. They'd stop me outside and ask if I was doing all right, their voices cautious. I smiled and said yes, because what else could I say? But my breaking point came one evening when she accused me of mishandling her medical files. "Don't touch what you don't understand," she snapped, her eyes sharper than glass. That night, while Daniel slept, I went back to those files. My hands shook as I sifted through the papers, pulling out the ones that didn't add up. I hid them, telling myself it was just in case. I didn't know then that those papers would become my shield. The night I made those copies, my heart raced so loud I thought the whole house could hear it. The printer light flickered in the dark hallway, each page sliding out like a secret confession. My palms were sweaty as I tucked them into a manila folder and slid it under the false bottom of my suitcase. I told myself it was just precaution. But deep down, I knew Margaret was capable of anything. She had connections, lawyers, and a reputation that made people bow. I had nothing but instinct and paper. Weeks passed, and I almost forgot about the folder. Until the night of the wire transfer. The lawyer arrived in a black car, briefcase in hand, and within an hour Margaret was richer than anyone in the neighborhood could imagine. I stood in the corner of the room as champagne popped, her laughter echoing through the hall. She didn't look like a woman who had suffered or needed anyone. She looked untouchable. When she turned to me, her eyes were cold. "You can pack your things now," she said. No warning, no explanation. Just a command. Daniel didn't stop her. He didn't even look at me. By the time the door shut behind me, I knew the woman who had thrown me out wasn't just cruel, she was dangerous. And the folder in my suitcase wasn't just paper anymore. It was the only weapon I had left. I will never forget the moment the money arrived. The lawyer's voice was steady as he read out the numbers, but the room spun around me. Nearly $300 million transferred into Margaret's account, like the world had just crowned her queen. She lifted her glass of champagne with a smile, so wide it felt carved into her face. My husband clapped her on the back like he had just won a lottery. I stood in the corner, invisible, my hands pressed against the hem of my sweater. Neighbors streamed in later that evening, curious about the new fortune. The mansion was alive with laughter, but none of it reached me. I was handed empty platitudes and fake smiles while Margaret told anyone who would listen how she had fought her whole life for this blessing. She spoke like I didn't exist. When I reached for a slice of cake from the kitchen counter, she swatted my hand away like a child. As the night wound down, she came to me with cold eyes. "You've served your purpose," she said. I didn't understand at first. Then she pointed to my suitcase at the bottom of the stairs. She had packed it herself, tossing in clothes like I was a stranger renting a room. Daniel stood beside her, silent. I begged him to say something, anything, but he only looked away. My little boy clung to my side, his eyes wide with confusion. Margaret's voice sliced through the air again. "Take her to a motel. She doesn't belong here anymore." The door slammed behind me. Rain poured down like the sky itself was laughing at me. As the cab drove away from the glowing mansion, I realized I was no longer just a wife or a daughter-in-law. I was discarded, and the only thing keeping me tethered to sanity was the folder buried deep in my suitcase. The world believed Margaret was untouchable, but I had proof that could shatter her crown. The motel walls were thin, and through them I heard the arguments of strangers and the faint hum of a vending machine outside. My son lay curled up beside me on the stiff mattress, his small breaths reminding me of the weight I carried. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. My tears had dried up somewhere between the mansion's driveway and the cab's flickering meter. I sat awake staring at the folder I had tucked beneath the bed. It felt heavier now, like it carried more than paper. It carried power. Yet part of me hesitated. Could I really use it? What if it backfired? The TV kept replaying the same breaking news headline. Fraud investigation launched in Fort Worth. Assets frozen. The name scrolled across the bottom of the screen again and again. Margaret's name. My chest tightened. The powerful widow was suddenly cornered. I whispered to myself, she's going to come. And just like that, I felt both dread and anticipation. At 3 a.m, my phone lit up on the nightstand. The caller ID was blocked. I let it ring, my hand trembling. Minutes later, it rang again. And again. I finally picked it up, pressing it to my ear in silence. Her voice cracked through the line. Kara, we need to talk. By sunrise, I heard a knock at the motel door. My stomach twisted as I opened it. Margaret stood there, dressed in yesterday's clothes, her makeup smeared from tears. The woman who had thrown me into the rain less than a day ago now looked small, desperate, broken. I need your help, she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't move. I let her words hang in the air, soaking in the irony. She had treated me like a servant, a nuisance, and now she was at my door. Behind me, my son stirred awake, rubbing his eyes. Margaret caught sight of him and pressed a hand to her chest, like the guilt had finally hit her. She stepped inside uninvited, pacing the floor. They froze everything, every account, every asset. They say I forged documents. They're going to take it all away. She turned to me, her face streaked with panic. But you still have the papers, don't you? I sat on the edge of the bed, crossing my arms. You mean the ones you said I had no right to touch? Her knees buckled as she sat across from me. Please. I can't survive this without you. For the first time, I felt taller than her. Stronger. Her wealth, her mansion, her arrogance, they all meant nothing now.
She needed me.
But I wasn't ready to hand her the folder. Not yet. She begged, her voice growing hoarse. But I didn't move. I let her desperation settle in the room like smoke. For once, I wasn't the weak one.
She was.
You think you can just erase me? I said softly, staring straight into her eyes. You thought money made you untouchable. She flinched, pressing her hands together like she was praying. I was wrong.
I see that now.
Just give me the documents and I'll make sure you and your son are taken care of. Her promise meant nothing. I had heard it all before. Empty words coded in manipulation. Instead, I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. It belonged to a paralegal I once helped when she was in trouble. Her name was Marla, and she owed me a favor. When she picked up, I told her everything: the documents, the altered forms, the frozen assets. Marla's voice was steady. Don't hand her anything yet. Bring the papers to me. I'll know what to do. Margaret's face drained of color as she realized I wasn't bending. You'll ruin me, she hissed. I leaned closer, my voice calm.
No.
You ruined yourself. The next day, I met Marla in a small cafe in Houston. The folder sat between us on the table, untouched, like it was radioactive. Marla flipped through the pages slowly, her brow furrowing deeper with every line. These signatures don't match, she said finally. And these dates, they overlap with hospital records. If this goes to court, she could lose everything. I felt my pulse quicken. So, what do we do? Marla looked up at me. We build a case. We use this paper trail to show the truth. Back at the motel, Margaret was waiting. Her eyes darted to the folder in my hands. Please, she whispered. Don't let them take it all. I placed the folder on the dresser, but didn't open it. You always said I was nothing.
A guest.
Disposable. But right now, I'm the only one who can save you. Her lips trembled as she tried to form words. But before she could, there was a loud knock at the motel door. When I opened it, Daniel stood there, his face twisted with anger. Daniel's eyes burned into me as he stepped into the room. He didn't bother to greet our son, who sat quietly on the bed clutching his toy truck. His voice was sharp, demanding, the kind of tone that once made me fold. Give me the papers, Kara. You don't know what you're playing with. I stood my ground, even though my knees shook beneath me. I know exactly what I have, and I know exactly why she wants them. I nodded toward his mother, who shrank in the corner like a scolded child. He slammed his fist against the wall, making the frame of the motel picture rattle. Do you understand what's at stake? Our family's reputation, my job, everything. You can't ruin us. I laughed bitterly. Our family? You stood there and watched her throw me out into the rain with your son at my side. Don't talk to me about family. The room filled with silence, so heavy I could hear the hum of the fridge in the corner. My son looked from me to his father, confusion etched across his little face. I pulled him closer, my arm wrapping around his small shoulders. Daniel's tone softened, but it was laced with threat. If you hand those documents over to anyone else, you'll regret it. I reached into my suitcase, pulled out the folder, and held it to my chest. My voice was steady. No, Daniel. The only one who's going to regret anything here is you. The next morning, with Marla's guidance, I walked into the courthouse in Fort Worth. The papers were sealed in a file under my arm, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was walking with purpose. Cameras lined the steps, reporters calling out Margaret's name. She avoided their eyes as she shuffled behind me, her power stripped away. Inside, the judge announced a freeze order on her assets. My chest swelled with quiet relief. This wasn't the end, but it was the first time the scales tipped in my favor. The courtroom was colder than I expected, the kind of chill that seeped into your bones. I sat at the front with Marla beside me, her steady presence grounding me. Margaret sat across the aisle, her pearls replaced with a simple black scarf, her hands twisting in her lap. The judge called the case, and my heart pounded so loud it echoed in my ears. When Marla presented the altered documents, the room seemed to hold its breath. She laid each page before the judge, pointing out the mismatched signatures, the impossible dates, the discrepancies that couldn't be ignored. Whispers rippled through the benches behind me. Reporters scribbled notes. Cameras flashed without shame. I kept my head high, my hands folded neatly in my lap. When the judge looked at me, his eyes softened. And how did you come to have these documents? My voice was quiet, but steady. I cared for her husband in his final days. I was asked to file these papers, but something didn't feel right. I made copies. The judge nodded slowly. Sometimes the smallest act of caution reveals the biggest truths. Margaret's lawyer stammered, trying to object, but the weight of the evidence was too heavy. The judge banged his gavel, announcing a temporary ruling in my favor. The assets would remain frozen, and a deeper investigation would proceed. Margaret turned to me then, her eyes glistening, but not with love, with rage. She mouthed words I couldn't hear, but I knew they weren't kind. As I left the courthouse, the reporters swarmed, microphones thrust in my face. "Are you the daughter-in-law who exposed the fraud?" one shouted. I didn't answer. I only held my son's hand tighter and walked forward. The silence was my power. The weeks that followed were a blur of meetings, hearings, and whispers. Margaret's once loyal circle began to crumble. Friends avoided her calls. Neighbors crossed the street to keep from making eye contact. Her kingdom was collapsing brick by brick. One morning, a letter arrived at my motel room, delivered by a man in a gray suit. It was a settlement offer. If I returned the documents quietly and withdrew my cooperation, I would receive a sum of money large enough to buy a house and secure my son's future. I stared at the paper, my hands trembling. For a moment, I imagined the freedom it could bring. But then I thought of the years I spent bending under her cruelty, The nights I cried alone while she belittled me, the moment she slammed the door in my face. No amount of money could erase that. When I met with her lawyer, I slid the letter back across the table. Tell her I don't want her money. I want my dignity. I want the truth to stand. His face went pale. You're making a mistake. But I wasn't. For once, I wasn't the one making mistakes. Time has a way of healing wounds, but the scars remain. Months passed, and slowly, I built a new life. With Marla's help, I found work at a local legal office, a place where my attention to detail became my strength. My son started school nearby, his laughter filling the evenings we spent together in our small apartment. Sometimes I would drive past the old mansion, its windows dark, the lawn unkempt. The place that once made me feel like an outsider now stood like a hollow shell. One afternoon, a letter arrived in handwriting I recognized instantly.
Margaret.
Inside was a page covered in shaky script. She apologized for the pain she caused, admitted she was wrong, begged me to find it in my heart to forgive her. I read the words slowly, waiting for the anger to flare. But all I felt was emptiness. Forgiveness wasn't something I could hand over like a folded sheet of paper. It had to be earned, and she had done nothing to earn it. I placed the letter back in its envelope and tucked it away. Some doors are better left closed. The final twist came quietly, without warning. Months after the trial, Marla called me into her office. She handed me a thick envelope filled with court documents and estate records. You need to see this, she said. Inside, I found proof that my son had a rightful claim to part of the trust. Hidden in the fine print of the original documents was a clause protecting the rights of grandchildren. Margaret's attempt to erase me had accidentally safeguarded him. Tears blurred my vision as I held the papers. For so long, I had felt powerless, like we were at the mercy of her cruelty. But here it was, in black and white, my son's future, secured not by her charity, but by law. When I walked home that evening, the sun was setting in streaks of orange and gold. My son ran ahead of me, his laughter echoing in the air. I thought about the woman I had been on that porch in Dallas, shivering, humiliated, discarded. And I thought about the woman I was now, steady, strong, carrying the weight of truth. I whispered to myself, we may have lost a family, but we found our freedom. And in that moment, I realized freedom was worth more than $300 million.